Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. Hosted by Stuart Armstrong, an experienced talent development specialist and coach, the Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. Always honest, sometimes controversial, never dull. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Talent Equation podcast. I'm really excited and delighted to have Loren Anderson from Rise Volleyball on the show. Loren, welcome.
Thank you, Stuart. This is it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
I think for everybody's benefit, we've been sort of connected up on Twitter. Part of this kind of, I guess, gigantic Twitter coaching talent community that's sort of been ongoing and having various conversations over the past years or whatever. So it's first and foremost, it's great to actually speak in person. But for the benefits of people out there who may not have come across what you do, why don't you tell everybody about your journey and your story?
Oh, thanks. I think you just included everyone who doesn't know what I'm doing. I run a volleyball club or a volleyball program in Boise, Idaho. That's the here and now. How I got there, the journey is back when I was about 17, I came across the sport of volleyball. I grew up playing multiple other sports, not volleyball. And when I was 17, I came across the sport, the doubles beach side of the sport, and started playing it pretty seriously. Or whatever that means to a 17-year-old, and really wanted to pursue it as far as I could take the sport. And that was kind of my, I listened to your podcast with JP, and you guys kept referring to the rabbit hole, and every time you guys said it, I kept laughing because I've had a couple rabbit holes in my life, and definitely one was the day that I discovered the sport of beach and volleyball. And I pursued it as a player very, very wholeheartedly for quite a few years with the intent to try to make it on the professional tour here in the United States. Played in some qualifiers for that and never quite made it. But I also picked up coaching very quickly along the way too. I was actually started coaching a year after I started playing at the age of 18, and found just a real love for sharing the principles of coaching or of playing with other people. And I've always been a very self-directed learner, always been really into delving deeply into things that I do. And so I immediately, went out and bought every book I could, went out and bought every video I could get my hands on, and just immersed myself in that area and loved the opportunity to share it with people. Unfortunately, as I look back on it 25 years later, I see that I was simply doing what others had always done. That's what you get when you read a book or watch a video. And I was just repeating what everyone was already doing. And sure, some of these coaches whose actions I was repeating or replicating were amazing coaches and still are to this day. However, I was never truly doing, I think that's true of every endeavor we start off with, whether it's something like coaching, or maybe it's cooking, or maybe it's, I don't know, exercise, or whatever it is we might be doing, art, there's always a larger degree of copying other people at the beginning until you can make it your own. And I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. I'm not sure I've decided to label it yet or not, but I'm not sure I really made coaching my own until about 5 years ago. So it took me 20 years to get to a point where I really felt like I was creating something of my own when I stepped on the court to coach. And so for the 20 years, it was just a lot of doing things other people had done, and thinking there was some secret that I was going to unlock some just miraculous way of doing things. And that as long as I just, I can very clearly think to the fact that my lack of success in connecting with my athletes, my lack of success in actually getting my athletes to become the best version of themselves that they could was because I wasn't replicating these ideas well enough. There was something I was doing wrong in that I was missing, some piece. And so I was always searching out that piece. And fortunately for me, about 5 to 6 years ago, I started coming across other coaches other ideas that led me down another rabbit hole, and that was my coaching rabbit hole, that allowed me to really understand that while what I had been doing all along wasn't something I would necessarily label as wrong, it certainly wasn't as right as it could have been. And once I started to really embrace the idea of player-centered coaching, and then that led me into studying and reading and getting into these ideas of ecological dynamics and constraints-based coaching and things along those lines. That really opened up a completely new venue for me to drop my coaching into and to explore new ideas of coaching. And as I said, I run a club, an academy. We have 20 teams, and I have 24 coaches who work for me, and all of us now are very active in implementing these ideas that you talk about, and that others so eloquently and so perfectly bring across to people, as far as how people learn best. It's not, I've gotten away from that idea that there's a right and a wrong. I think it's a continuum, and on one end of the continuum you have not a lot of learning and not a lot of fun, and on the other end of the continuum you have a lot of fun and a lot of learning going on. And I think that's kind of where we've gotten ourselves to now.
I think you probably find that there's absolute legions of people out there who have a very, very similar kind of developmental journey, both as players and also as coaches. And if I'm honest, I was listening to you talking there, and so much of what you said resonated in terms of my journey. I was talking to Nick Levette, who's kind of one of my regular co-hosts on the show, and we both were we intended to start talking about something else entirely, and we ended up talking about this, and very much just sort of, he said that he spent most of his time in his early years, as he described himself, as he was doing soccer, football. He was a football instructor. He says he didn't really discover coaching until in the last, say, similar to you, 5 years or so. And I think perhaps that also correlates with a prevalence of information that maybe came into the internet space, and research that had kind of, I think, maybe been hidden up to this point, that then became more prevalent. And I think there's actually a growing community of people out there who are kind of moving into this new realm, and almost, I hate to use this phrase, but it feels a bit like you're born again as a coach. I don't know if you can resonate with that.
Oh, 100%. I think, it is, there's certainly a community that has grown in my eyes very recently, but in reality, it's been there for a while. I've just only recently, within the last 4 or 5 years, really been able to get in touch with that community. It all started for me with someone I believe you're familiar with, which is John Kessel, who works with USA Volleyball. And he was the one who really started my, I guess, to continue with the analogy, he's the one that offered me the pill and said, you can choose not to take this and stay where you are, or you can take this and understand that the rest of your life is never going to be the same. And he didn't put it that way, but that's certainly the way I took it. And it's been nothing but a wonderful, aggravating, beautiful, and frustrating journey since then. So.
So let's just, it'd be good, it would be useful, I think, maybe to just sort of drill into that a little bit more in terms of what's been the wonderful aspects, what's been the frustrating and aspects, kind of what's been your experience?
As far as the wonderful side of things go, I think through consciously implementing the ideas behind nonlinear pedagogy, behind constraints-based coaching, behind the ecological dynamics in sports, through consciously implementing those in our gym every day, we've seen our athletes get better faster. We've seen them get better where it matters, which is during the competition, during the actual playing of the game. I joke with some of my closer coaches, like my kind of core coaches that I have, that some of our players would never look good if they go back to their school programs or they go to some other program that is more of a blocked drill-based program. Our players are not going to look good. They're not going to be able to do those things. But you put them in a game, you put them in the actual context of the reality of the game, and they know how to, or let me rephrase that, they can figure out how to solve the problem in front of them. And that to me has just been a really wonderful shift in our gym, that to see, it's how I learned. I had a coach one day in my entire life in the sport of volleyball. And I don't have the credentials behind me to say that I'm some wonderful high level volleyball player. I believe that I can play at a pretty high level, or at least used to, when my body could keep up with some of the more physical people that play our game. But and so I really, that was kind of the big thing for us, is we segued into this idea. We didn't drop what we were doing and start everything else. We were a very drill-based program when I first started our program, and I was a very drill-based coach for 20 years of my life. And we kind of eased into this idea. 1 year we were maybe 90% drill-based, and then the next year we went 50, and the next year it was 75. As far as game-based, sorry. So we were 90% drill-based, so then the next year we went to like 50% game versus drill, and then we went to where it was 75% games versus drill, and then we went this past season and the season before. I would say 99.9% of what we do in our gym is games and play, more importantly. And it's just been wonderful. I mean, the engagement level of the players, the enjoyment level of the players is, it's outstanding to me. I very much recognize that our program is one in which I don't know what percentage of our players are going to be going on to playing at the collegiate level or things along those lines, but I know it's not a majority. And so what are we doing for the rest of them? And what we're hopefully getting them to do is to understand the joy of play and the joy of just competing, regardless of the long-term possible, financial outcome as far as a college scholarship goes, or things like that. So that would be my answer to what wonderful side of things have been. I hope that all makes sense.
Totally. And actually, there's just a couple of things I want to unpick
Sure.
there, really, which is, well, first and foremost, I think what you did was really smart, because I think this is maybe a mistake. It's certainly a mistake I've made, and it's a mistake I think quite a few people make, which is when they discover, like you say, a non-linear approach or an ecological approach, it becomes, and I certainly went through this process, I became really evangelical about it, and was like, I've been doing it all wrong. Right. Forget all that. We're doing it differently. And that's some pretty spectacular failures, doing it that way.
Yeah.
Because what I didn't take into consideration was the players who'd been used to a very different approach. And all of a sudden, you've got the guy who used to tell you what to do now not telling you anything.
Yeah.
And they lose confidence, and there's a whole range of factors that go in there. And as a result, some of the performances really suffered. And also that, the players have to get used, and they have to be able to get kind of accustomed, I think, to the idea of making decisions and solving problems and stuff like that, particularly if they've never done that one before, because they become very reliant on the coach having all the answers. And actually, quite often as well, if things aren't going well, they'll kind of look in that direction.
Very much.
And I think what you did is what I just, it's what I describe as periodization of methodology, where you phase it in.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's a big lesson, I think.
Well, yes and no in a as far as effectiveness goes. I think from my perspective, we phased it in. We phased it in over the course of 2 to 3 years, but we based our program, and most of the club sports programs here in the United States, at least, we have kids in our program each year who are new to us, who don't know, who haven't been part of what we've done in the past. So, for instance, this season, it's about 70% of our athletes were returning athletes. So we had 30% of the kids who this year came from other programs who are very drill-based, very coach-centered, very blocked training. And so we get 30% of those kids who walk into our program, and there is no phasing them in, because our program has already phased, our entire program has already phased into this type of training. And so those kids walk in the door, and boom, they're hit with this complete 180 from what they're used to. And that is a great segue into talking about what frustrates me a little bit about this journey, is the roadblocks we run into in that. Some of the kids, they love it. They dive straight into it, and they absolutely love it. And I mean, mostly because it means they get to play the game a lot. Every kid who picked up a volleyball on that first day they picked up a volleyball did so because they wanted to play the game, not drill the game. But they get so conditioned that that's how you're supposed to learn. And like you said, they get so conditioned to coaches being the ones with the answers. I recently watched a TED Talk. I don't know who it was, but it was a gentleman who talked about the power of play. And he made a point in there that I thought it really was just an unbelievable point about how in our society, as we've taken away the ability of these kids to just play, of the opportunity for kids to just play, and everything is being scripted by an adult, we've actually moved the locus of control from the internal in the children to external to the adult. And I think that's what's happening in youth sports. It's not just happening in society with the disappearance of just free play, fun play, but it's also happening in sports, or it has already happened in sports, where the coach is the one that always has the answer. And so if I have a kid who's out there playing and they do something wrong, their first instinct is to look to me, because they expect me to have some magical wand that I can wave and say, boom, here, fix this, and you're a great volleyball player now. And that is definitely a frustration on my part, in that, we're battling some societal evolution, I think, a little bit as we try to make these changes. There's certainly a social context in which we're trying to make the changes, and we butt heads with where society has taken our children right now, I think.
I think this is a subject that we could talk about for a long time. There's a lot, but I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's something that really concerns me, and in terms of some of the conversations that I've had in the last year, or a couple of years since I've been, I suppose, publicly advocating a move away from this drill-based culture, and I've tried to be at pains to say that I'm not, again, a bit like you saying right and wrong. I'm just sort of advocating that the coaching industry needs. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, which you've so articulately expressed, is can we actually move the locus of control away from the coach as the person with the activity towards the player who can start to experiment and be creative within an environment that actually offers them that opportunity?
Yes.
And I think one of the things that really brought this home to me was I was working within my sport of field hockey, and I was working in one of the academies, the kind of performance academy that they created. So this is for the kind of top, or some of the top under 16, under 18 boys and girls. And I could not for the life of me get them to try something different. I couldn't get them to kind of take a risk and be prepared to create and have failed. Well, actually, that's not 100% true. With the girls, I found it more difficult. They were kind of a little bit conditioned, but with the boys, I found it. What they would do is slightly different. They would actually almost go over the top. They would start to do crazy things that they would probably never really actually apply into a competition. And that was kind of partly a way of saying, "Hey, look, yeah, I'm trying different things," but in reality, they're so afraid to fail at doing the simple things that they'll just do the crazy things, and then if you fail at that, it doesn't really matter,
Right? Because they already know they're going to fail.
Exactly. So, and again, so there's either this environment where it says, that failure is no good, and so therefore you've got to conform. And I certainly found that with some of the players. And then you've got this other one where you've got these kids who are kind of almost, the ego is so big, and the lack of desire to fail in front of peers meant that they just went in the opposite direction. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that they've never had a locus of control placed upon them, where actually that is encouraged.
Right. I completely agree. There's so much of that emphasis on the idea that, especially, I mean, in youth sports, but even just with youth in general, that there is a right way of doing things, and that everything that we do is to cut out all the wrong and come down to the right. And, and that is so different from reality. and yet that's what our kids grow up believing, especially, I mean, in this context, in youth sports, they think there's one right way to do this thing. And my sport of volleyball is known, most coaches consider it to be a very technical sport. And what that says to me is that there's a right way of doing everything. And if you're not doing it the right way, you're not going to succeed at our sport. And that's definitely the way I approached it for so long, was that, I needed to remove the variance, remove the all the chaff from the perfect thing in the middle, and bring those kids to that. And that was my job as a coach, was to chisel away all the wrong so that all we had left was the right. And I look back on that now. I look back on how I coached in that way, and I think, gosh, what did it feel like to be coached that way? To be told that 99% of what you were doing was wrong, and that this one thing, only this one way of doing it was right. How does that affect a person on the psychological level? And compare that to not telling someone there's a right way, just giving someone the freedom and the opportunity to explore a lot of variables and a lot of different ways of doing things, and to therefore, be able to say, I'm, there is no perfect. I'm not perfect. I don't need to be expected to be perfect. I just need to go out and put forth effort and solve this problem that's in front of me.
So that's something I wanted to go back to. Actually, you mentioned when you were sort of explaining to me about some of the kind of the wonderful aspects of what you're doing, and you said that you've got players who wouldn't perform particularly well within a block practice environment, but they do well in the game context because they're able to solve problems. So I was kind of interested in that one, and it'd be great if you could just kind of maybe bring that to life for us. Maybe if you've got some examples, I guess.
Not sure of specific examples, but definitely on a general side, I could say that, again, I think every kid is different, and every kid has their way of doing things. And in our program, we have principles in which we want them to solve problems. So we kind of draw the lines in the sand and say, these are within these principles, solve the problem your way. Whereas I feel like a blocked practice is very much about a pre-scripted, perfect execution that represents some mental model that the coach has of the perfect way of doing things. And that matching up to every athlete in my gym is going to be almost impossible. And so the way I've seen youth development in our sport happen a lot is that the kids that match that mental model that the coach has, that pre-scripted way of performing that action, those are the kids that move on. Those are the kids that get placed on the top teams. Those are the kids that get the better coaching. They get to play, maybe more importantly, get to play against the better competition, because that to me is probably the richest learning ground that they have, is when they get that opportunity to play against people that challenge them. And so those kids are the ones that end up being the best. Those are the kids that end up moving on in our sport. The ones who can't perform in that pre-scripted way that matches the mental model of the coach, those are the kids that get punished in typical practice. Those are the kids that get there's some sort of punitive, maybe, or at least some participation-based punishment that is enacted on them. And so those kids are the ones who don't get on the top teams. They don't get to play against those other players there's such a rich ground for learning. They don't get and they don't have a really great sense of confidence and self-efficacy in their ability to do things. Whereas in our gym, we just tell them, solve the problem your way within these set of principles, and we're happy with whatever they do. It doesn't have to be I really worked hard to just kind of erase all of my expectations as far as the way a problem can be solved. I'm there I'll certainly help present other solutions to our athletes that maybe they didn't know existed, because I have, 25 years of playing experience and a lot of different solutions that I would use to solve a problem. But I also want to see what they would come up with. And one of the greatest things that I've come across with this approach in our gym is seeing kids come up with solutions that I never have seen before. And those are my greatest moments in my gym, is when I see a kid do something that I'm like, whoa, that was, how did you come up with that idea? And they, of course, they're just like, well, it's just what I needed to do. And, that's just such a great moment to have with an athlete, to be like, no one ever taught you that, but you chose that solution based on all of the factors that were involved, and it worked. Now let's see if maybe we can come up with another solution, or how do we refine that solution that you came up with so that it can become more consistent, so that it's not something that really the result was almost, just a matter of luck. But let's see if we can refine it so that now you can use that solution in a variety of different ways, or a variety of different circumstances, so that you're now contributing more to your team or whatever. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, entirely. I mean, you've just summarized perfectly what I describe. I mean, it's a genuine joy for me when those moments happen. And going back to the point of the previous 20 years and the last 25, I didn't really have any of those moments of joy in the previous 20 years. And I'll tell you, and just to give you a little story, I'll tell you a little story about a little boy actually who funnily enough, is part of my Sunday morning under 10s hockey group, all kind of 45 of them. And we did a little bit at the start of the session where I just said, hey, who can come up with a really cool way of changing direction with the ball? And they all went away and they all did their thing and they all came back and they showed me their stuff they come up with. And I would say, oh, that's interesting. Let's try that again. And there was one little boy who came up with this particular move that he wanted to sort of show everybody. So, okay, it's great. Yeah, let's work on that. Let's see if we can do that. And it involved him sort of lifting the ball a little bit. So then we went into a kind of a mini game scenario, like a 2v2 sort of scenario, and that one of the teams were numbers down. So I kind of just jumped in to make it kind of work. And this little boy was up against me, and genuinely, he came up to me, and I sort of went to go and kind of put in I guess half a kind of little tackle, but just to sort of see what he would do, and just to sort of challenge him to maybe try and do some sort of maneuver. And he went and did this thing, and he absolutely, genuinely, completely wrong-footed me. I mean, I kind of tried to make out oh yeah, I just let you go past me, but he absolutely did me. And I was he didn't realize at the time, and I didn't really say anything, but I remember thinking, oh my God, that is unbelievable. And yeah, and so anyway, I mean, it was just a fantastic moment for me. It'll stay with me forever. And it's a moment of genuine coaching joy. And I kind of feel that so many people maybe, are missing out on those moments, which are, kind of so motivational for me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are the moments that are the best moments of my coaching year, every year now, where players, it's not, I think for me, it used to be when everything came together and worked like a Rube Goldberg machine. All the parts that you had been working on in practice finally came together, and that ball made it to the end of the Rube Goldberg machine, and you were able to celebrate and say, it worked. And that's the other part of this, I guess, for me, is that I used to treat coaching a team, coaching athletes, as if they were this complicated system that was linear. And now with this embracing of this complex, nonlinear idea, I recognize that Rube Goldberg analogy is so far off, and that, that you can't just go in and fix one little part and think that you're suddenly going to have a working machine. There's just too many dynamics involved. And so for me, that's where I used to get excited, was when it all came together and, that was perfectly executed. Now for me, the moments that I love the most is the chaotic moments where, our sport has a tendency to get very chaotic because it's, a rebound sport. We can't hold the ball. There's no opportunity to slow down and control things. It's you go at the speed of physics and gravity. And so chaos can ensue very quickly. And I used to get upset when chaos would come in, when things would start going wrong, in my opinion, wrong. Now I relish those moments because I love seeing the creativity that my players can use to find their way out of those moments. And what emerges from those moments is awesome. I absolutely love seeing the solutions they bring into those moments. And yes, of course, I like seeing when things go the way we want. When the pass is well and the set is well and the hit is well is great, and I love seeing that. But I love even more the moments where chaos ensued, and then somehow somebody did something to rein in that chaos and bring it back into, a somewhat constrained environment. And I think that those are to me, awesome moments. And just that creativity that arises from each kid when they're doing that is beautiful to watch. And it's so much fun for me to watch.
So, in terms of just drilling a bit further into some of the challenges, have you, in terms of, I mean, so it sounds to me like the part your kids you've got involved, absolutely love the experiences and really enjoy the way that you operate. How have others, such as parents, been brought into the idea of the way you do things?
That's a good question. I mean, first off, not every kid in our gym enjoys the way we do it, and that is I guess frustrating is not the right word. Sad to me is the right word. Kids who leave us because they want to go to a program that is more drill based, more coach centered. We very much buy into that idea that the coaches who talk less and let the kids learn more are doing their job better. We get a lot of kids who, not a lot, but we do get kids who don't like that. They want constant feedback from coaches. They want constant correction, constant talk from coaches. At matches, when we actually are playing in a competition, our coaching staff is taught to not really do much other than just sit and watch. We relate it to the idea of a music teacher at a piano recital. The music teacher sits in the crowd and watches and doesn't say a word until it's over, and they go up and tell the kid good job, and then the next day at practice they have notes that they've taken on things the kid needs to work on. And that's really how we treat the sport of volleyball. And we don't have we do have kids who don't like that, and we have parents who don't like that. We make it very clear at the beginning of every season. We have a team or a club-wide meeting in which I put forth the philosophies of how we coach. I talk to them about these things. I try very hard to dumb them down to the point where I'm not getting, into science and, nonlinear pedagogy and constraints-based coaching. I just tell them what are you going to see in our gym? This is what you're going to see, and this is why we believe it works. And everybody's gung-ho with it at the beginning of the season, but then when the actual season is there and the matches are there and the parents are seeing the coach just sitting on the sidelines smiling while they're watching the team play and not saying very much, the horror of not actually calling a timeout because, this team of 15-year-old girls is struggling and all the parents are yelling is call a timeout. And we don't, we want the kids to figure it out on their own. We have specific times when we feel we've told our coaches that they should be calling timeouts, but not for things like just the random variance of the game or the swing of things in the game as far as, the other team scored 8 points or whatever. Like that happens. Like these kids need to learn how to figure it out on their own. And we do get a lot of parents and a lot of kids sometimes even who are frustrated with our perceived uninvolvement during a match. I had a friend of mine who lives in California who taught me a really cool saying that I loved that we put in forth of all of our parents. That is, pre-practice, before you even go to practice, that's like the prep time for the coach, and that's the off time for the athlete. And then when you go to practice is the work time for the coach and the prep time for the athlete. And then when you go to the match, that's the work time for the athlete and the off time for the coach. And I absolutely love that. We embraced that wholeheartedly when he told me that. It makes absolute perfect sense. Like from a teaching perspective, from an education perspective, that's how everything works in education. If you're a math teacher and you give a kid a test, you don't stand next to them giving them feedback on every answer. you let them take it, because you don't know what they know unless you actually make them show what they know. And so we look at all of our matches as tests. Here, I want to know what you know. We're not really, that's our thing about being a developmental club. We're not concerned with the outcome of the match so much as the expression of what you know, both as individuals and as a team. And we do run into a lot of issues with, I wouldn't say a lot. We run into issues with parents. We have 180 kids in our club this year. We certainly didn't have 180 parents who had issues with this. I would say maybe 10. But I think how we deal with it mostly is through education, through making sure right at the very beginning of the season, every parent knows that this is what it's going to look like in our gym at practice and at tournaments. And that we don't shut them out after that. We keep an open line of communication with them. So if they do have questions, I had a parent who came to me and wanted to know why the coach of his daughter's team refused to call a timeout. And I had a great conversation with him about the efficacy of timeouts. We've actually had studies done in our sport of volleyball to show that that timeouts are ineffective at all ages. We've had people from the professional level down into the youth level who've done studies and shown that the results after a timeout are random, just as the results before the timeout. There is no, the perceived result after a timeout is being fooled by randomness. There actually is no effect on the results of the game as far as points being scored. We think that timeouts can have some effect sometimes. I love to use them as learning opportunities. Hey, we're seeing something, that other team is doing something right now that we've never seen before. I want to call your attention to it, and I want to see if you guys can come up with a solution for it. To me, that's a great use of a timeout. Another great use we've used is just to celebrate. If a kid does something amazingly creative that they've never done before, I'll call a timeout, call the kids in, and celebrate in that moment that something awesome just happened. But we get a lot of parents who don't understand that. And I think that comes down to adults, parents, and kids too, putting their view of sports that's based on professional sports onto youth. A professional coach calls a timeout, not always, but they call a timeout, or they're very invested in controlling what's going on the court because there's a lot of money on the line. There's a job on the line. There's they've been paid to do this, and it's entertainment. The professional sports industry is an entertainment industry, and the people who are being entertained are the fans, and those fans are paying everyone's salaries. And so if those fans are not getting what they expect out of the experience, they stop paying and people lose their jobs. And so if the fans expect a timeout, if the fans expect someone to be subbed, if the fans expect someone to be fired, ultimately those things are probably going to happen. The youth sports industry is not an entertainment industry. It's an education and development industry. And so I feel like we can't put the same expectations on coaches and players and teams that we do at the professional level.
You so much in that. That's for people listening. That is, there's so much gold dust in there. First and foremost, the very fact that you say at the starting point, you're a developmental club, so you're at the very start of the kind of, if you like, philosophically saying, we're going to do what we can to enhance the development of the participant. And this recognition, actually, that competition, and I've said for a long time that competition is or can be the enemy of talent development. And the reason I say that is because it becomes the absolute focus, and particularly coaches often end up coaching to win the match.
Yes.
As opposed to coaching to develop the players in order for them to win the match. if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I think, and that's why I feel it can be the enemy of talent development, because, and I saw, again, going back to my experiences, players who clearly had been told, do this, don't do that, because what the coach is saying is do the most effective thing for us to win the match based on their locus of control. What you said earlier about this, the punishment, the kind of, if you like, participation-based punishment, either, you're sitting on the bench or you're not being picked for the big teams because you don't currently fit the bill in terms of most effective person to be able to win the game. Well, if you flip it, like you say, and say, actually, the space, the learning space, where we're going to see how much of what we've been preparing, how much of what we've been training for or learning, is how much of that is now going to translate into the game. Then what you're then getting is you're getting a scenario where the participant, when they actually go out to compete, they're able to demonstrate what they've learned. And I always think that when a coach says after a game, we worked on this and we didn't execute, they think that's the player's fault.
Yeah.
It's on them. Because if it hasn't translated into the match, or some areas haven't translated into match, they're the areas that the coach needs to take note of to go, these are things that we now need to, readdress, if you like. And I love what you said around the whole idea of pre-practice, and being, the preparation for the coach and the off time for the player. And there's a famous rugby coach called Michael Chaker who coaches the Australian team, and he says exactly the same thing. He says, Saturday, match day, that's his time off. The players get on with it.
Yep.
I think there's an awful lot of experienced coaches who probably think of it in similar ways.
No, I agree. I think, one of the issues that we face as coaches is how we see our job and how we view our role in the development of the athlete, or if we even see our role as the development of the athlete. Is our role simply to win matches? I think a lot of coaches see themselves as trainers, as in like a dog trainer. I have 2 dogs, and and the typical way you train a dog, and constant feedback, and treats and rewards and punishment. And another concept that I think goes right along the lines of that is that idea. I came across it not too long ago, about whether you see your job as a carpenter or as a gardener. And that one I really like a lot too, because, in carpentry, there is an exact science to it. There's an exact way to do things, because if you don't do, if the corners don't match and the angles aren't right, then things will fall apart and they won't last as long as they should. And so I see a lot of coaches who treat coaching human beings as if it was carpentry, when in reality it's more like gardening. It's just making sure the environment is well suited for the best growth that you can get. And you got to water, and you've got to put down some fertilizer every once in a while, but there's a lot of time where you're not doing anything and you're just watching it grow. And I think when we as coaches can redefine our role in the athlete's journey, that helps us. It helps us understand what we need to do. It's not easy for me to sit on the sideline of a match and not say much. It is very much my desire to say a lot, to give them every ounce of experience I've ever had in the sport of volleyball and shout it to them from the sidelines in hope of it making them better and in helping them, succeed, because I want them to be happy. I want them to feel accomplished. It is very difficult for me to
understand.
Yeah, it is very difficult for me to sit on the sideline and just let it be their thing and not say much. It's hard. And
People don't realize the level of restraint you need.
yeah,
Because we, as coaches, we're kind of hardwired to help people.
yeah,
You see somebody in pain, you help them out, don't you? And when you see the players, they've got anguish and they've got issues around how they're going to solve this problem, and they're going to lose the game. Sometimes there's tears, all these sorts of things. And every ounce of you wants to step in and kind of wrap your arms around them and give them the solution, because you know what they need to do. But you also know that the minute you do that, you're robbing them of the opportunity to learn.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that was the, if there was one simple phrase or one simple thought that completely changed who I was as a coach, it was that thought, that understanding that whenever I give them the answer, or whenever I step in to bulldoze the path for them so that they can walk without any obstruction, that I was robbing them of the opportunity to learn. And that someday they were going to come up against the same issue again, and I wasn't going to be there, and they wouldn't know how to solve it. And so I think, to me, that is, if more coaches could see their role in that light, I think that we would have a much easier time in convincing more coaches to make it athlete-centered and player-centered rather than this coach-dictated environment.
And like you say, though, I think if I am, when I'm on the side, if I make an intervention, it's usually I don't have the opportunity to use timeouts. So often, if I have, by the way, I absolutely love the fact you use timeouts to draw the player's attention to something, but you're not giving them the answer. You're just saying, I want to draw your attention to something that's happening because you may not have noticed yet. And then they have to solve that problem. And I absolutely love that. Now, I don't have timeouts, but I do something very similar, which is I'll draw either individuals or groups' attention to something without necessarily saying, so usually in the form of a question. Where is the space? And I'm obviously dealing with 9-10-year-olds who gather around the ball like bees around a honeypot. But it's the same in a lot of invasion games. So obviously emphasis on space is important for that. But that question is something that I pose a lot. Where is the space? And then when you see them actively try and utilize it, it's quite fascinating. Quite fascinating watching them try and do it.
Yeah, I agree. It's to me, I don't know. There's so much more joy for me as a coach when I can ask a question like that and see them go out and explore it and come up with the answer, rather than just me tell them to do something and then they go do it. I don't even really enjoy doing that with my dogs. So I certainly don't enjoy doing it with other human beings whose development and learning I'm in charge of.
Yeah, and I think when you see it that way as well, one of the things I've sort of struggled with a little bit is, we're not always that successful when it comes to competing against other teams where the players they're definitely more advanced technically. Because one of the factors I think about working in this way is that you do need quite a bit of time to develop the player. You give somebody a technical solution, you let them practice it over and over again, and then they can do it. And they'll go out and then they'll do that in a game, and forget the fact they do it probably mostly at the wrong time, but they'll do it. And it seems, on the surface, it seems very kind of like you said with the machine. It's kind of, there you go, we've done that. That's now applying. Right, that's working. And it only needs to work once or twice for the player and the coach to both feel vindicated.
Yeah.
And then when it doesn't work, it's like, well, that's just because some crazy variables happen. That was just a bit unlucky. It'll work again the next time. And when my players are there, they haven't developed. They're not as advanced technically, but where they are more advanced is their appreciation of the problem they're trying to solve within the game. And I see them trying to solve the problem, and they don't quite have the technical ability to do that yet. So they're coming up with different ways of doing it, and the limitations sometimes get in the way. But I love the fact that they are trying to solve the problem. And there are moments when, and other people, particularly, sometimes parents come to me and go, you see the way they're playing? Our kids play better than the others. And I'll go, yeah. I know we've got to stick to that one, haven't we? Because they do play better. Now, they're not always getting the results and they're not always getting the outcomes and they're not necessarily as technically proficient, but they do play better. The technical stuff will come later.
Yeah. Yeah, that to me is a really important point that we've explored in our gym, is that idea that, it's not about laying down a technical foundation first. It's not about, you've got to learn the techniques before you can learn the tactics. I think that's just such a strange, very mechanistic, linear view of things that it doesn't represent reality of anything. That they're things that you concurrently should be developing, and that sometimes that game sense, that ability to understand the game and see the play and read what's happening, is going to be more important. There's no doubt in my mind, it is more important later. And so if you're not developing it now, then they're never going to get to that later. And so, I think when you're dealing with the youth levels, and you have a program or a coach who trains only technical and does very blocked and drill-based things, the ability of anybody at that level isn't so high that the game sense is needed. I look at our sport, in the sport of volleyball, and if I think of like a team of 14-year-olds, there's not a lot of 14-year-olds who can hit the ball hard enough so that the ball is traveling at you at a speed where you actually needed to do a good job of reading the play before it was hit. You could, in our sport, we teach very much about using your eyes and your attention correctly and perceiving the environment and what's happening. And if you're not good at that, if you just follow the ball the whole time and you just watch the ball and then the person spikes it, it doesn't travel that fast yet, because these kids they're not super technically proficient at it yet. And so you could simply react to that ball and probably dig it. Whereas later in life, obviously, as everybody gets bigger and stronger and faster, somebody's hitting that ball, and now it's coming at a speed where if you're just relying on your reactions, you're going to be nowhere near close to it. And so a lot of coaches would teach to get the technique first and then add in the tactical, perception-based things later. And I think, to me, those things, the perception, what we call in our gym attention, the intention, what is your goal, and then the decision you make based on those two things, I think those are the fundamentals of our sport, or really any sport. And those are really those are the things that you should be working on every single day in your gym. And then let the physical technique emerge for that individual as they are working on those three things. If they have the right goal, if they're looking at the right things, and they're making great decisions, there's really only a few ways to do that. And they usually look a lot like these techniques that these other coaches are drilling into kids. And so I feel like rather than drill it into them, let's evoke it out of them through the game.
You've also just again summarized my hypothesis. I was talking about this the other day, actually. So there's a great movement development specialist. I was talking about it with them. Have you heard of Sean Misker?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. He was on the podcast earlier this week, and he was talking about. We're talking about this with him, and there's a great movement guy who I got really friendly with, a guy called Kelvin Giles, an Australian movement development specialist, and he used to say you need the physical ability to do the technical stuff, and then the technical ability to do the tactical stuff in that order. And I was quite a big devotee of that for quite a long time. And I now think actually it's the other way round.
Yep.
Because I think if you develop a technical if you develop a technical ability, or you become very technically proficient in certain ways, well, firstly, you then, the old adage of if the only tool you've got is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. That one comes in.
Absolutely.
But then the second thing is you become quite focused on those techniques and the application of them, and without ever appreciating or being aware of the moments when those movements are appropriate. And I've seen this, literally a generation of kids in my sport who were taught techniques. And this was the kind of national governing body edict. We're going to teach these kids in inverted commas, core skills. And what I've now seen is generation of kids who can do these movements, and they are perfect, biomechanically, physiologically perfect, at completely the wrong time. Time and time again.
Yep.
And but what's interesting is, and I've had loads of discussions with coaches about this, when you say why, they'll say, oh, we're just not good enough technically. And I'm like, we're perfect technically.
Yeah.
We're just terrible in terms of skill, because we conflate the idea of technique and skill. Skill is the application of the technique in practice, in the context. Well, if you learn the technique isolated from the context, well, you're never actually really developing the skill, are you?
Uh-oh.
Hello?
Yep. I think I got you.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine.
I dropped out for a second. No problem. The vagaries of the internet. Anyway, did you catch the last bit of that around the skill technique bit?
Yes, sure did, and I completely agree.
So, I mean, that's one of the reasons I've become kind of so aligned to this idea of working, kind of almost from a awareness. And I'm totally with you on this. Is I'm interested in what the players are aware of, because unless you're aware around you with what's going on, you then can't determine appropriate movement patterns to solve the problem, because you're not taking in the information that would help you make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I was was one of my first and best things that John Kessel ever said to me when he first started in having a profound influence on my coaching. Was very, very simple statement. We move because of what we see. And so if we're not seeing the right things, then we're not going to be moving the right way. And I agree, there is a component of ensuring that we have the capacity to move. And I think that's a different thing. Am I strong enough? Am I able enough to move in that way? And so, that's to me like your strength training or your mobility training, where you are increasing someone's capacity to move in that way. But ultimately, what I think a lot of coaches, and what I was guilty of for years, was teaching people how to move, or where to move and when to move, without teaching them the thing that actually caused them to move, which was the sight, the attention, the perception. That perception action coupling. I was teaching them the action devoid of the perception. And so they got really good at moving, but then they could never do it when it was actually needed, because they didn't know how, they didn't link it to the perception. And so, now I reverse that. We want to teach them what to see, and then teach them what their goal is, and let them explore what movement will actually result in that goal. And so I think that's the big one for us, is really helping kids really define the intent of that movement. In this moment, the ball's coming over the net. What is my intent? What can I visualize in what I want the goal to be, my external goal, my game-based goal in this moment? What is it? And if we can have them really clarify that, and then make sure they're looking at the right things, then I think the body will self-organize and create the correct solution to, or maybe not the correct, but a correct solution for that goal. And then, then our job as coaches is to just put them in that situation a lot, create games that allow them to find that solution over and over again so that they can explore all the different variants within that solution and understand that there is no perfect way of doing it, but within those principles, they can enact that solution in a variety of different circumstances. So,
yeah, I mean, and the great thing for me, and I think I sound like I'm probably going to be repeating myself again, but the thing for me that's just so fantastic about working in this kind of way is the beautiful. Well, there's so much exploration. Kendall McQuaid, who was on previously, I was talking about guided discovery, and he said, well, he doesn't really talk about guided discovery because discovery suggests that there is something to be found, a right thing, whereas he talks about guided exploration. And I really like that concept.
I do too.
But for me, there's a exploration for me because I genuinely, every single session for me throws up such rich learning in terms of ways of approaching, the problem of helping the learner learn. That's one of the things that's just so. I mean, there was so much kind of repetition. I mean, when I was a drills-based coach, but I was also kind of like in terms of my own development, I was literally just, it's like bring out I've got files and files of drills and plays that I used to just literally just wheel out.
Yeah.
It's this session this week, I'll just do this. But it's soul destroying, isn't it?
Yes.
So the benefit to me of this approach is it's actually so much more stimulating, both intellectually and emotionally, in terms of because every session is a learning opportunity.
Are you
Hello.
there? Yeah, are you there?
Oh, yeah,
I got you.
Sorry, just dropped out a second again. Well, seeing as the internet's starting to really play tricks with us, and as much as I would love to carry on with the conversation, I've got a group of 4 or 5 children who are going to be coming back in through the door because they're coming here to have pizza before heading off to tennis and then cricket.
Oh, that sounds like a fun day.
It is a fun day. I'm leading the cricket, but the tennis is done by somebody else. Anyway, listen, I've had a absolutely fantastic time having this conversation, and just selfishly, thank you very much for coming on and kind of sharing your experiences, because it's actually been hugely illuminating for me. And where can people find you? Where can they find out more about what you do, and and get in touch with you if they want to?
We do have a website. It's risevolleyballacademy.net. We recently have been redoing the website, so it doesn't have a ton of information that's along these lines of educational on it. It's mostly very functional for our families right now in our program, but I'm slowly adding back in the educational content that I've had. There will be a blog on there and some other things about our philosophies of how we coach and things along those lines. And those will be back up within the next couple of weeks. You can also find me on Twitter at Rise Volleyball. I'm also on Facebook at Rise Volleyball, and on Instagram at Rise Volleyball. So I try to be pretty active on all of them. Our kids tend to be, so I like to hit them where they're active. Plus the conversations I've had on Twitter, like with you, and have led to wonderful things like this. So I'm trying to be more and more active in that realm as well.
Well, great. Well, I mean, you'll be able to point, your parents and your coaches to this podcast in due course. And I'll happily send you across the embed code if you want to put it into the website as well.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
Great stuff. Without further ado, then I'll stop the recording, and then but I wanted to just say another time, thanks very much, Loren, for sharing your experiences and your challenges with everybody.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pretty awesome experience.